What's going on, guys? This is Boss Jansen, and today I wanted to look at some live drum mixing. I have a song in front of me called Let Go by my great friend Gaby Alegro, who's a songwriter based in Miami, Florida, and I think it'd be great to go and check it out. So with this song, I didn't actually mix the final project. I was just playing drums on it, but I have the stems and they sounded great to me, so I think it'd be great for this lesson. What we have here is 2 kick drum mics, 2 snare drum mics, a top and a bottom, 4 toms that I use, a hi-hat mic, and some overheads that were space pair. Before we jump into anything, I just wanted to talk shop about the little things we have to make sure we have organized correctly before we start mixing. The first thing you have to do is make sure everything is well phase aligned. When I opened the session, I noticed that was already done in the recording session, as you can see, like for example in this kick drum. So I'm not going to go into it further right now, but that's definitely the first thing you should make sure. Secondly, I like to make sure everything's nicely organized. So you can see like my kick drum mics are going to an aux track, the kick bus there, in case I wanted to mix those as a little package. I have the same going for the snare drum tracks there. Then the same for the toms. And then all those, including the hi-hat and the overhead, are all going together to the drum bus. So I can mix those as one big instrument to make everything sound cohesive. And maybe the observant ones of you even noticed that I have a drum parallel compression bus set up with some sends that are currently bypassed, which we're going to talk about later. Last thing before we start is to clean up the track so we have the cleanest canvas to work on before we get started. And the only thing really to do with drums for that is cleaning up the tom tracks, which is what we call gating. And I know there's a bunch of plugins, noise gate plugins that do that, but what I've found in my experience is that the most time-consuming, but the most effective method of doing that is just manually gating the toms. So I'm just going to show you really fast on this one tom note how I do it, because I noticed this one drum I only happened to play once within the song, so it's really easy for me to show you real fast. So let me show you a little before if I left all the noise in on this one tom track. See, out of all that noise, we only need that one note. So let's chop everything else out. Put some little crossfades to clean it up like this. And then all we have is that one note. And that really cleans up, you know, your snare sound, your kick sound, and anything else going on, because you don't have all these extra elements muddying things up. Now, before we start diving in and throwing some plugins on, I just wanted to talk through my 3-step mix process that I basically use for any instrument, but especially drums. It always seems to fall down into these 3 steps, which I really encourage you to follow. The first being subtractive EQ, where you take out anything you don't like, which then goes into the compressor, and then after that, you add your icing on the cake with the additive EQ to get it to where it needs to be. The reason I do that is how it all works around the compressor, and taking out all the noise before the compressor means the compressor won't be working on it, and the additive EQ after is so that the compressor isn't squashing what you're trying to add. So that being said, let's dive in. So I just wanted to look at this first chorus area mainly, but let me show you guys how it sounds. As you'll notice, there's no plugins on the drums right now and no levels, only a bit of panning, and the rest of the band is mixed just for the sake of context. So let's hear how this chorus sounds. So as you can see, it was really well recorded, so let's jump in and pick it all apart. Typically, I always mix bottom up, so we're going to be starting with the kick drum, move on to the snares, package it all together with the overheads, and then put the toms and hi-hat in after that. So let's see how our kick is looking like, and let me get a quick balance between the two. Cool. So you can hear it's got everything we need. We have some nice attack in the high end and beefy enough low end. I did just also take a little bit of the lows out of the dynamic mic because I just wanted to clear that out and let the condenser mic take the low end for the bass drum, basically. So when we're talking about low end stuff, we really want to clean out and carve out as much as we can because that's the hardest area in the mix to get nice and clear and punchy and all that. So yeah, that's why you're going to be seeing me make a lot of decisions of carving out low end just to make sure we keep that as clear as possible. So with this kick drum mic being that AE2500, it's actually two mics in one capsule in the same place. Right next to each other, so I'm actually not going to affect those separately as if they were like your typical kick in and kick out situation. So that's why that's all I'm going to do for the individuals. And let's go through this 3 steps on the bus here. Pull up our first EQ and let me dial that in. Cool. So maybe this is a great time for me to cover my love, or I guess maybe really my hate for 500 hertz when it comes to drum mixing. As soon as I start pulling that out, things start to clean up. For drums, that's just a really boxy area of the EQ. So you're going to see me pull that out a lot. Don't ask too many questions about it. Above that, or I guess below that, I should say, there's a little bit of the low mids that I just wanted to clean out, as I said. And no more than that needed right now, so let's grab our compressor. I always seem to gravitate towards the CLA3A a lot on kicks, but you'll see it come up more on other drums as well. I'm going to drop this gain down because it always defaults to add some gain, which we don't need, so let's dial this compressor in. Cool. Again, pretty simple. I'm normally aiming for about 3 dB gain reduction, and I'm sure you could hear as I started to crank the peak reduction up a little more, it started to eat up some of the low end, which is pretty typical of any compressor. But obviously, I wanted to make sure that wasn't too much because this is a bass drum. We need some low end there, but I just went to the point of 3 dB gain reduction and also getting a nice controlled amount of low end and not eating up too much. Now let's look at our additive EQ on the back end. I often like jumping towards the PukeTech EQ or Pultec style EQ just because it has the additive EQ frequencies that I gravitate towards. So let's dial that in. Yeah, so I grabbed towards the 60 hertz on this guy because we saw before that we didn't need any more of the 100 kind of area, so I went for 60 as well as controlling it a little with the attenuation. On the high end, I cranked it up and flicked between the 4 and the 8K as you saw, just to see which I prefer. Normally I gravitate towards the 8K, but on this kick drum I like the 4K more, so I went with that and then dialed it back to taste as well as a little control on the attenuation. Moving on to the snare drum, let's get a quick balance of these two. Cool. I already know with snare bottoms, we don't need a lot of them, so that's why I was pretty quick to turn it down pretty far. We only need them just for a little supplemental sizzle, because the top normally has plenty of body that we need. We just need a little more snap and sizzle out of the bottom, so that's what that is. But with that being said, let's check out our subtract VQ on this snare drum. Cool, so a little bit of that 500 again, but I'm not as heavy-handed as I was with the kick. Typically, I don't actually take out 500 of snares a lot at all, but this is a kind of chunkier snare, so I did a little bit there. Be pretty light when you grab 500 out of a snare drum, because that's where a lot of the body does sit. As you saw me also solo that little band around 1K to find that ring. I don't know if you heard that ring as well, but I found where that was and then ducked it straight down. And then just a little of that low mid control again. Let's grab our CLA 3A again, because that's what I like on snare tops. Cool, simple, very simple plugin. That's probably most of the reason why I use it. I'm going to also say it's because of sound. For the additive EQ, I'm actually going to save that for the bus. So let me move on to the snare bottom first. Yeah, so as we said before, we don't need a lot with this snare bottom, so that's why I'm way more heavy-handed with this EQ, high passing it super high, and then just grabbing the kind of barky frequency out of the snares a little bit, just under 1K, just so we can leave all the bright, snappy stuff left over. For this compressor, let me grab the CLA 76. It's a very bright compressor, and then we can toy a little bit with the attack and release just to make sure we get through exactly what we need and keep it out the way otherwise. So let's check that. Cool. Again, very simple. And now let's check out this additive EQ. I tend to gravitate often towards the Sheps 73, which my roommate likes to make fun of me for. But here it is. Again, for a snare drum, it has all the EQ points I like to gravitate towards as well. So let's dial that in. Yeah, so a nice bit of 12K for a little bit of that sparkle. 4K is what I often gravitate towards with drums, the attack of the drums. So that's why I boosted that up. And then lastly, just a teeny bit of that 220 where the fundamental normally sits. I didn't want to, again, do too much of that, but I have a little bit of that there. Now let's get into mixing these overheads. I'm going to take this time to emphasize the importance of your overhead mics in a drum mix, because they really are the glue and perspective of the kit. So don't be too shy when blending those into the kit sound. They really make everything sound as one instrument as opposed to a whole bunch of individual close mics like we have otherwise. So again, don't be too shy with your overheads, but let's check out this subtractive EQ. Cool. So again, our trusty 500. I don't know if you guys agree with me, but as soon as I start pulling it, it starts to clean things up. But then also our high pass filter, just to get our bass drum and our lower toms out of there, because with the distance of the microphones, it really takes away the clarity and the punch of that low end. So I'm not shy when I'm scooping that out either. And then just again, a little low mid control for that snare that sounds pretty fat. So as far as a overhead compressor, I'm going to go for the Puke Child compressor this time. It's a very warm compressor, and also there's a bit of a trick. When you boost the input and subsequently turn down the output so you don't blow your ears off. These plugins are emulations of real analog gear, so when they make these plugins, they really try and design those analog warm tendencies in there. So when you drive the input gain, it simulates the real gear and pushes some saturation and some warmth in there. So I like to do that. Then I only have to be pretty gentle with the threshold to get our 3 dBs as we are used to. Cool, yeah. So for me, I don't like my cymbals to sound too brash and too harsh. So that's why I like to use a nice warm compressor on them just to kind of mellow them out and smooth them out. But let's check out our trusty Shep 73 for our additive EQ as well. And that's why I automatically actually turn up the drives on these as well to get that same sort of saturation feeling going on. Yeah, I didn't want to be too heavy-handed with the brightness on these for what I mentioned before with the cymbal, so I might even end up backing that down later. But now let's check back our balance between the overheads and our snare and kick. Yeah, you can see as I brought those overheads back up a little bit, it brought some more life back to the kit. So again, don't be too conservative with your overhead blend. Let's check out our hi-hat to finish this little groove package we got here. Same as the snare bottom, we don't need much of this at all, so I'm going to be pretty heavy-handed with the EQ and yank it down pretty far, but let's see what we got. Cool, let's check out our full groove package together. I think that sounds pretty good to me. Let's move over to our toms. Let me loop this section and we'll start with our first tom. Cool, so not too much with that one, our trusty 500, but I also wanted to control the fundamental of the drum because it just rings out pretty long. So I'm actually using the dynamic EQ function on this EQ as opposed to just dropping the gain down of that frequency in general. So to explain what a dynamic EQ is really quick is that you can adjust the attack and release like a compressor, but then only affect that on a particular frequency band. And that's what we're doing here on the fundamental, just to control the ring of that. So I'm letting the attack of the drum through and then just starting to clamp down as I find that that ring is just getting a little bit too long. So I'm going to play it again just because you can really notice visually how it's working. Great, and now our compressor is CLA3A as usual. And our additive EQ. Cool, so I added back the 4K on the tom there just to brighten up the attack of that. But then I put the low end back because I just wanted the tom to be fuller, but we took it out before just to control the tail, but I just wanted the whole tom to feel fuller, so that's why I just added with a regular EQ there. Now that we have 4 toms in front of us here, I'm just going to copy those across because they're all toms. They're all going to want to be affected very similarly. We're just going to have to move the fundamental frequencies as the toms get lower, those frequencies obviously get lower. So we're just going to check across and make sure we grab the right fundamentals. Yeah, because this is quite a full second tom here. I'm just going to back down the additive a little bit because it's already pretty chunky. And adjust our compressor as well. Let's check out this floor tom. Floor toms I always really want to be big and beefy, so I actually took off the subtractive EQ on the low end, and I'm actually bringing it up a little higher than I did on the first tom. Let's check that compressor. And now our last tom. Yeah, I'm going to take that dynamic EQ off as well, same reason as the other floor. As you can see from the waveform here, that last tom actually came in pretty quiet, so I'm going to bump up this gain here as well as checking the reduction on this compressor. Cool, let's check the balance between the four. So the last thing is that I'm fanning the panning of the toms from left to right here. You just want to make sure that that correlates to your overheads, that the overheads are, in drummers or audience perspective accordingly, and that your toms match that, or else it's just going to sound weird that in overheads it's over here, but you placed it over here, and etc. But let's see how that all sounds together. Let's turn some groups on to make this a little faster for me. Cool, I think that's sounding pretty good. And let's head back to our first chorus and let's talk about this parallel compression. So what parallel compression really means is that I'm running a bus in parallel to our regular bus, where we're gonna slap a compressor on there, squash the crap out of it, and then blend it back in with our bus. So the reason we use parallel compression is to basically just squash the crap out of the drums so we get some consistency and some weight to the drums without destroying all the dynamics our wonderful drummer played in and putting those on each individual track. So the plugin that I noticed I like the sound of for these drums was actually the Kramer Pi. And let's squash the crap out of these. Cool, yeah, so I got about 10, 15, maybe 20 dB of gain reduction there, and then I was just playing with the level and muting it in and out to know that I felt the right difference that I was looking for. I'm sure you heard that it gave a little more life to the snare and whatnot, but I did have to end up adding this high pass because it was adding a lot of rumble to the bass drum, which, as we said, we don't need that to get out of control. So let me show you that in case you missed it. Yeah, a lot of rumble. We don't need that. Yeah, so the last little sparkle I add really is a short plate reverb, no longer than 1 second typically. Then I high pass it up to about 250 to take out any of the low end that we don't need to lengthen the duration of. But it's really just to give the snare a little. So yeah, let's dial that one in. Yeah, it's pretty subtle. There's not much to it, but let's check the whole thing out in context and hope we did a good job.
I can't let you go till you let go of me. And if I can't take you home, at least let go of me.
Well, that works for me for a little quick skim through everything. Yeah, I hope you found this useful. If you have any more questions, please leave them in the comments below. If you have any suggestions on anything else you want me to cover in future videos, also in the comments below. Other than that, just subscribe to make sure you don't miss the next gems coming up. And have fun mixing.